Be seated, please.
Good singing with you all. We have been in this prayer series. We are nearing the end. We have been looking at some times in the scriptures when righteous people prayed hard, but God still did not answer their prayers as they prayed them. Our first example was King David in the Old Testament. God could not answer his prayers because of David's own sin. The second example was the Apostle Paul. God would not answer his prayers because God knew what was best for Paul, and that was with his thorn in the flesh. And today we'll look at a time when God should not answer the prayers of the prayer. Just so you know, 2 years ago we were in Matthew and looked at this section of Scripture, so you may remember some of this. I'll set the stage for you. Jesus and his apostles had been going through that special Passover meal in that upper room together. Judas had already finished. He'd left because he was finalizing the betrayal, which was coming very soon. Jesus now took the rest of the group to the familiar place just outside of Jerusalem. It was good for them, this Gethsemane, this Mount of Olives retreat center. And this is where we pick up the story in Matthew chapter 26. If you want to read along, I'll start in verse 36. Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, that's James and John, along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it's possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will." The garden area nestled in the olive grove, named after an oil press, and I'll bet the disciples could not imagine right now how much this place was pressing on Jesus. The place of serenity was becoming something worse, and Judas knows the place too. That's why he'll lead those men to this place, the exact spot where he will show up in a short while. Judas would arrive. Jesus, before then, though, had some hard work to do. He's going to pray, and his heart and his mind and his body is going to be run through the ringer. It was prayer time, and if you think prayer is not hard, you haven't prayed like this. They're all walking together, but as they reach the place, Jesus leaves them and walks on with three of them, his closest, Peter, James, and John, who were also on another mountain, if you remember that. Takes them a little farther, then leaves them, and he goes on from there to pray in this hard place, the hardest so far. Death is coming. He sees it. He knows it. I think he can feel it, almost like death already has its hands wrapped around his neck and is squeezing the life out of him already. Matthew's words, did you hear them? He began to be sorrowful and troubled. Jesus tells his friend, he's trying to explain it to them, to his friends, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." And I know we say those words, I'm scared to death. Jesus means it when he says it. Jesus said those words, and I don't know if you can feel what he was feeling. How can we imagine it? If you knew that later today, some men who hated you and wanted to see you die were coming to take you, would you feel it? If you knew the Roman soldiers who were gifted at, skilled at, assigned to you, torturing you and killing you very slowly and very effectively, how would you feel? If you knew the demons were itching to tear you apart if they could just get to you, well, how would you feel? Jesus didn't just leave those three friends there. He left them there with a challenge. Watch and pray. He needed them. He goes on from there and falls with his face to the ground. His head now is in the dirt as he pours out his soul to his Father in prayer. And pay attention to the prayer. I bet you've heard it many times, maybe your whole life, but you hear it? "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me." If anyone thinks Jesus at this moment has some halo over his head, if he has all this time been guiding through life, gliding, not even almost touching the dirty, sinful dirt, you don't know Jesus. Some of the classic paintings of Jesus in Gethsemane praying are sweet. He is there looking up to heaven in some. He is clasping his hands, maybe leaning on a large rock. It looks so serene, so beautiful, but scriptures are painting a different picture than that. This is brutal. This is ugly. This is warfare. It's a death match, and you're going to see very soon who survives it and who doesn't. I know some folks don't think Jesus really was that afraid to die, but I disagree. I've read some of what some have said, but he is facing, as Erdman says it, a bitterness which no man has ever tasted. It's the cup. You keep reading about the cup. The cup is this pivotal moment for him. It comes down to the cup, the cup. He is God, he is deity, he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, but he's human, he's vulnerable, he's like us. He doesn't want to suffer and die, neither do you. Nobody wants this, the cup. It's a way of speaking about an experience of suffering, of pain. It's death. And we know about the thorns driven into the scalp. We know what it's like when the fist or the open hand hits the face. We understand a loaded whip dragging across the back, laying open the skin. We know that the nails going into the flesh and driven through the muscles. We know the blood loss flowing out of the body until all he feels is anxiety and dread and humiliation and terror and loneliness. He is dying. That's the cup. But the cup is more than just dying. It's the whole experience, and it's, in scriptural terms, it's the experience of taking from God his wrath, his righteous wrath. Old Testament through Revelation. It's more than physical. It's the full weight of God's righteous, terrible wrath that is meted out against the sins of the world. That's what he's dreading. In a short time, he's going to feel every sin of every human who's ever lived and everything that comes with that, the punishment for all of that. No wonder he's saying, let it pass, Father. I don't want to take it. I wish to forego it. I don't want to go through it. Father, please, I am begging you, don't make me do it. Do you hear him in the prayer? As Wright says it, he was a man in meltdown mode. He had looked into the darkness and seen the grinning faces of all of the demons in the world looking back at him, and he begged his Father not to bring him to the point of going through with it. That's the cup. That's what he's passionately praying to avoid. That's the first part of his prayer anyway, pleading not to die like that. But it's so much more than that. I think maybe the words, I don't know if he used the same words or if he just said that and said no more and just kept feeling it. I don't know, but I think that I don't want to die. That's what I hear. I don't know if I can do it. I'm not sure I can make it through this whole thing. I want to avoid it. If you really loved me, Father, rescue me in this moment. And I am guessing, I don't know how you read that. It's not whispered in soft tones in a sweet prayer, but it is like gruffly gurgling up from the depths of the bowels of his soul. We zero in on the first part of his prayer, but don't miss the second part because that's the more important part. The will of the Father is the most important part of this whole story. That is the plan. This is the purpose of him coming. It's the only way salvation gets to us. So beyond the beginning of his prayer, here comes the second part of his prayer with a but, a yet, a however. Not as I will, but as you will. Not as I will, but as you will. I don't know how he said that either. Maybe he just said that and left it. Maybe he kept saying the same words. I think it might have been something like this. If he said more, I don't know. I'll submit to you, God. No matter what, I will obey. I don't want to walk through this, but I will walk this road. I will trust you. I will do it. If this is where you take me, lead me on. I go willingly. That's not about me anymore. It's about you. It's always been about you. And it's about me now being faithful to you and doing whatever you have told me to do. For the good of all, let me die. All of us, I think, have to get to this point in life if we are going to follow the Lord. None of us wants the pain. None of us wants the crisis. None of us wants the suffering. But if you desire to follow the Lord, then you will march right into your fears and terrors too, if that's where He leads you. And maybe you all have been praying hard, something like this, not exactly. Maybe you have in your prayers been screaming and crying and wishing and pleading. And what if He doesn't answer you either? If you've been there, take comfort in what Jesus does. If the Father doesn't answer the prayer, it's not because He doesn't care. If the Father doesn't answer His prayer, it's not because He's not willing. Of course, He wants to, He can't, and really, He shouldn't answer the first part of His prayer. And this is where all of us come to this conclusion, which isn't really stated in these words, but we know it from the Scriptures. If there was any other way the Father had to save the world rather than His Son dying, He would have done it. If there was any other way for Him to give us grace and salvation and forgiveness and heaven, to go around His own Son being tortured and killed, He would have done it in this moment, saved Him. But there is no other way. There can't be another way. There's no alternative to this. And so He's going to die. And Jesus knows it. He knows the dilemma. This is what He came to do. He's been resolute all along in finishing what He started. He will save the world. But in this moment, it almost feels like saving the world is too much. The overwhelming nature of this is crushing the life out of Him, but He is here for this. Well, at some point, after about an hour of this gut-wrenching prayer, Jesus gets up, goes and checks on the disciples that He had left right over there, and He finds them not praying, not watching, but sleeping. How's it going? Not well. Through the tears and His prayers, maybe He can hear the snoring. It's embarrassing. I figure He's frustrated. You can see it in His words, but He also shows them grace, and you can read the words for yourself. And Jesus goes back then to the same place and starts praying again in the same way. In some way, you might say the exact same prayer. But it appears things are already changing if you notice in the wording of what He prays. Can you hear it? Listen to verse 42. My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, then may your will be done. Maybe you can see in those words something is moving, something is changing. If God's not changing this, then maybe God's changing Him. The Father's decision hasn't changed, but what is changing is in His Son's heart, His determination, His commitment. Not that He didn't have it, but He didn't know if He could go through with it. I think there's a transformation happening during the praying. And I think if you're watching, you might find some similarity between you and Jesus in the way you pray and what comes of it. See, even when our circumstances don't change, we can still change in the circumstances. So if the Father doesn't answer what we first pray, maybe He is still working to accomplish His purposes. If He can't remove the crisis, maybe He will give you whatever it takes to get through the crisis, even if it kills you, and it may. Hebrews 5. Did you hear it when we read it? He is learning to trust the Father. He is learning obedience. And you may say, Jesus has nothing to learn. You're wrong. Jesus has to learn these lessons, and these lessons are only learned in the fire. So He goes back again to His disciples. What are they doing? Sleeping. Again, really? You ever been in a boring class in school listening to the teacher drum on and on about a subject you care nothing about, and you are tired and you're fighting it, but you are losing? You ever been there? Another board meeting your boss is called. You don't care. It's dry and meaningless. Has nothing to do with your job, and your eyes start closing. You been there? You ever been listening to one of my sermons and it goes on and you're not engaged and the preacher sounds something like this, blah, 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 and your eyelids start getting, you don't have to lie. I watch. I know. The disciples are living this and losing the battle of determination and commitment. They can't even stay awake. They are losing and sleeping. Thankfully, Jesus is winning and getting stronger. And as we've seen before, He has compassion for them. Read it. He comes back a third time and prays hard again, probably similar to what He's already said, but He keeps saying it, and I think things are changing. Can you tell? Verse 45, after the third time praying and coming back, he returned to the disciples and said, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Get up! Let's go. Here comes my betrayer." Jesus walked into the garden with the words of Scripture, sorrowful, troubled, overwhelmed. Can you see how he has been changed by his prayers, even if God hasn't changed a thing around him? You can say God didn't answer the prayer as he prayed it, and it's true, the first part anyway, but there are some things to remember about this prayer. Don't forget, first, God could not answer the first part of his prayer, so he could answer the second part of his prayer. He could not save Jesus as he asked, but he could still accomplish his will as he needed to do. Don't forget that. Second, if Jesus needed the Father's help, he got it. You may not see it. You may not see it in Matthew. Luke tells us an angel from heaven comes to him and strengthens him. Judas is leading the group to bring him in, to capture him and lead him through a silly kangaroo court and humiliate him and torture him and kill him. And he gets up and says, "Get up, fellas, let's go, it's time." And with that, he will march away with them willingly to die. Third, remember, Jesus is victorious here, and it makes the next victory possible. We speak and pray and sing and remember in the Lord's Supper all about the agony of the cross and the celebration of the resurrection, but there would be no cross and resurrection if Gethsemane hadn't happened. Gethsemane makes that possible. The battle in the garden is all about prayer. It hangs on prayer and what he will do. If Jesus decided not to go from there, which would have been his prerogative, to say, "I'm done, I quit, I'm out," he could have walked away, but he didn't. This is not one man praying sweetly for himself so he didn't have to die. It's one man in a life and death battle of prayer while the whole world hangs in the balance, waiting to see what he will do. And you already know what he does. If Jesus chose not to die, we would be lost. Thank God it did not end like it could have, but ended like the Scripture says it. History shows it. Jesus went on to die. One more thing I don't want you to miss. We sometimes try to put ourselves in Jesus' place to say, "I wonder what it would be like to be him praying like that in the garden." But have you ever felt like maybe God was also suffering in the moment too? What would it be like to be him? Not passively listening to a prayer and unable to help, but feeling every second of that as his son is dying. He feels it. He knows it. He understands it because he goes through it too, as any parent would. I've shared this before. Maybe you've heard it. Maybe you know the story. March 2nd, 2013, Mitchell Jones died. He was a 10-year-old boy from Utah fighting a losing battle against a debilitating, muscle-wasting disease that claims every single victim. And Mitchell's dad started writing on Facebook about all of it, the ordeal, the journey, and he called it Mitchell's Journey. And followers from all over the world watched him as he wrote it and lived through the experience in some ways through the dad's words. One day near the end of the journey, Chris, that's his dad, wrote this online. "Although my young son was dying, I realized death wasn't the end, but it was a painful goodbye, even if for now. Reunion may as well be forever away, for my heart aches and yearns to have him back with me the way he used to be." That's grief. As death inched closer, the veil between this place and over there became increasingly thin. Sometimes I wonder what it would look like were we allowed to see all that is truly happening. Perhaps we might be startled to see all the hands unseen that carry us in ways we do not appreciate or feel. There was a point when Mitch asked me, "Dad, is there any other way?" I held my son quietly and I wept. Countless were the nights I begged God for a way out. I pleaded for mercy. I begged for my son. As his father, I would have traded places with him without a moment's thought. I asked God, "Is there any other way?" As I tried to listen to my father, I was reminded of another one who asked for a bitter cup to pass, and not even he was spared. There's a saying that reads, most people wish to serve God, but only in an advisory capacity. How oft I have been tempted to think my finite mind knows better than my infinite Father's. So many times my heart cried out, please, not this, anything but this. I begged God for another way as though I might devise a better plan, yet I know I cannot see what he sees. I don't know much, but what I do know is this mortal life is a place to learn and grow under the tutelage of a divine teacher, a place where we learn how to see in the dark and hear the voice of God in our own wilderness. I can see that now. I understand there is no other way. Yet here I am talking of pain and suffering as a divine tutor, and I myself on my knees, drenched in tears, begging for relief, scarcely able to bear the weight of his sorrow. Jesus knew the agony in the garden. The Father had to share it too. I don't know how either one of them did it, but grateful that they did. Jesus pled with his Father, save me, and he heard him, but he could not rescue him. He could not if he was going to save us. So he went on to die so Tony Gentry could live. Hebrews 5, if you heard it, during the days of Jesus, as his life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. So he heard him praying and pleading, and he still let him die. Jesus prayed hard that God would save him, but he could not answer that. No, he should not answer that if he was going to save us. He blessed him. He would raise him up. He would honor him above all. But his Father didn't do a thing to stop it. Why? To save every one of us. One more time, God could not save his Son and you at the same time, so he let him die so we could live. I don't know what God is doing in your life. I don't know what happens and why he doesn't answer your prayers as you prayed them, but I will trust him. Will you? We have to trust him and learn through the process what obedience is like. Obedience. And that's why we'll trust him. We'll still pray and believe even if we don't get what we ask. It's why we still pray after he doesn't ask. Still learning the lessons of what obedience looks like. And what about you today? Do you trust him? Are you following him? And could we help you? Because if we could, we would be honored. Let's stand and sing this song. Come if you need to.